Super Cyber Friday. We've got a question just for our two guests to start the show. And that is, I'll start with you, Jason. Give me some good advice about dealing with security validation.
Validate all those controls and processing procedures surrounding your critical assets first.
That is good advice. Now, Dan, the complete opposite. Give me some bad advice on security validation.
I would say only validate what your customers are asking you to validate.
Well, that's good bad advice. And Jason, what is some worse advice for
Take those
validation?
assets, go on the dark web forums, and ask our nation-state enemies to help validate our controls, and give them a bounty while you're at it.
That is bad advice. I would say go so far as to say horrible advice.
Get ready. It's Super Cyber Friday.
Welcome, everybody, to Super Cyber Friday. My name is David Spark. Today's topic is hacking security validation, an hour of critical thinking about verifying the processes you have in place actually work. My two guests are the people you just saw. That's Dan Walsh, he's the CISO over at Village MD, and also Jason Martang, who's a sales engineering manager over at Pantera. This whole event is sponsored by Pantera, and they actually do a lot of interesting stuff in terms of managing and validating your pen testing. More about that later in the show, but huge thanks to them for sponsoring this very Super Cyber Friday event. I was about to say video chat because that was our old topic. All right, 7 different ways you can participate. Chat room. Submit how not to validate your security. Also submit how do we make it 10% better. Vote in the polls. Join us on video with Bring Me On. Very few of you do that. We'd love it if you did that. And Andrew, our producer, will try to do that. Ask a question at any time. You'll see at the very bottom of the screen. You can ask a question at any given time. And vote for your favorite question, too, as well, especially if a lot come in. I want to know which are the most popular. All right. We played good advice, bad advice, worse advice. Also, get your questions in about how not to validate security and how to make it 10% better. At 20 minutes past the hour, we will put a poll live of how not to validate your security, and we will play our game. I object. I've got 3 really good competitors for this. I'm counting on you. Craig Herter, our winner of Best Bad Idea last week, will come on. And at 30 minutes past the hour, a brand new game, The Public Interest, a game that you can play along as well. So you'll have fun with that. And also 40 minutes past the hour, the votes on how not to validate your security will bring on the 2 top worst idea contenders to face off to determine who really had the worst idea. And then last questions and final advice. And then at the very end, we will have our meetup. And that's where you get to meet each other face to face. So stick around for that. We will provide that link at the very end of the show. All right. Next Friday, we're going to be doing hacking prioritization. That's March 25th, an hour of critical thinking about which security holes need to be filled and which ones don't. There is a link at the very bottom of your screen. If you click on that link, you can register for next week's. It will not take you out of this video chat at all. You can still very much be in this video chat, but you can also register for next week. That'll be there for the majority of the show. So at any time, go ahead and click that link. And you want to do so because if you register by 5 p.m. next Tuesday, you are automatically entered to win a CISO Series jacket. Now, this is a classic. This is with our old logo. You'll get one with the brand new logo. Okay, enough of that. Let's get into our discussion right now. And questions are already coming in. That's very good. But I'm going to start with you, Jason. We say security validation. That seems an extremely broad topic. So let's just start off. What is the spectrum of what we're trying to validate here?
Yeah, and you're correct. Very, very broad. When you think about all the controls that we've invested time, money, and effort in over time, that could be series, even several years. Really, I think at the end of the day, we're looking and we need to understand what is critical to our business. And that's going to vary, but we want to start there and base it and focus it on that risk-based approach.
By the way, I was just noticing Mike Wills has a great bad idea. Use a soothing voice to intone, I see your security concerns and I hear your pain in order to validate them. It's got it's not only a bad idea, but it's also condescending on top of it. I like that as well. Thank you, by the way, for the validation spectrum. Sorry, I didn't validate you on that as well. Dan, what would you add to Jason's comment about the spectrum of what we're validating here?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's absolutely right. I think it's, it's not just so you have like a control, you have how that control is designed, and you have kind of evidence that control is operating effectively. And that's how a lot of the compliance frameworks take it. But then from an operational point of view, we have different types of controls. We've got administrative controls and technical controls and other types of controls, and they have to be validated in that same way. And so I think it's I think without that, you really don't have assurance that you're in control of your environment.
So I remember talking to a CISO at RSA in person. So this goes back a few years ago. And he was saying, what I'd love to know is, I set this up today. I put these controls in today. A year from now, how off base am I?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'll start with you, Jason. How does that happen that you become off base after a year, that things drift? And how does one understand that?
Yeah, it's a good point, right? So you mentioned that the first benchmark you mentioned was, after a year. And I think the reason why things are drifting is because you're not continuously validating. So all of a sudden you're on course. And when you take a look at the map, you're all the way out over here. And it's like, now I have to course correct and come all the way back. And I think the biggest reason is that the environment is not static. The environment's very dynamic. You're introducing so many things day by day, week by week, whether that's new technologies, new people, new processes and procedure, or of course the variable, maybe something like Log4Shell comes out again, and that throws everything out of whack.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen this, I guess, configuration drift problem yourself, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, you see it in multiple areas. Number one, from a cloud infrastructure point of view, if you don't, use compliance as code or something like that, and you have people in there manually, pushing buttons, so to speak, that's a problem. Think about it from a vulnerability management point of view. If as a CISO or a security lead, you're having to stay on top of your technology teams and your business teams to patch, and it's like this tremendous effort to get them to do that. You take your eye off the ball for 1 second, and all of a sudden it's like those vulnerabilities are back up. A lot of what you'll see around security validation struggles reflects the maturity of the business. Mm-hmm. So that means that business processes themselves probably aren't getting validated, and security validation will actually end up being a lower priority than that.
Mm-hmm.
I would think it's a little bit of that, as well as we're human, right? So even when you have processes and procedures in place, a small little mistake, or someone didn't have enough coffee, if you're like me, and all of a sudden you forgot to make or document something as part of that procedure, something flies under the radar. And then again, there's a little bit to the left of where we're now drifting off course.
All right. Now, I have a question, though, for the audience right now. We had a huge surge in registrants early on Friday. If you're new to the Super Cyber Friday or video chat, if you knew it by then, let me know how you found out about us, because I'm interested to know how you all discovered us. Hey, some good questions came in. I want to address them right now from Mike Wilkes, who's the CISO over at Security Scorecard. How can you ensure you align the internal security controls with external, or for the outside-in validation verification? I'll start with you, Jason. What do you do?
So I think and it's almost like taking the same approach but with two different angles. Mm-hmm. And both of those controls should essentially, if you have a SOC or some type of incident response procedure, you should be responding to both of those. So what I would do is test systematically from both ends, and almost like a dual-pronged approach. See where beachheads or where perimeter, the quote-unquote perimeter, could be crossed, as well as have an understanding of, if something has already happened, what is the risk exposure internally.
Okay. What do you add to that, Dan? And we also, actually, before I add to you, Dan, Mike Wilkes just joined us. Mike, thank you for joining us, and thanks for the question. Do you have something to add to the question, or your sort of concern around the question?
Well, I think it's oftentimes two different teams, right? Somebody's doing internal audit, SOC, and they're establishing all the controls, and then someone else is doing, compliance and external validation of them. So I'm curious how you keep the two in sync, because there's lots of, like I put in the chat, lots of developers know how to make an S3 bucket world readable and get around the security control policies on AWS. So you need that outside-in validation, continuously checking to see if your controls are effective, because developers will find a way.
Dan, is it two different worlds?
It's two different. Yeah, I mean, it's two different cultures, and I mean, there's a couple ways you can keep track of it. What I've seen to be fairly effective is, you know, one of the things that I've done in the past is we have a control framework, and so that control framework is almost agnostic of whether it's, you know, looking at it from an internal perspective or an external perspective. But then what you have to do is you have to take that, you have to drill that down to the next level for that specific team and say, okay, so here's what this means for you, right? So DevOps, I think I saw maybe a comment from Mike or somebody about permissions in AWS. So DevOps, here's what this means for you, for this particular set of group of controls that you're responsible for. And you really need to kind of explain it to them. And I always go back to like explaining to them as like, this is how you can deliver a quality service or product as a DevOps engineer, or this is how you can develop a quality service or product, you know, as a desktop engineer, and you're helping folks reset their passwords, making sure you're following all the controls. So if somebody calls in and pretends to be the CEO, you actually validate that that person is who they say they are. So I think there's definitely like some business process that I think has to be baked in. And I think as much as we like to be kind of engineers and just, you know, sit behind tools, I'm not saying that we do that, but sometimes because our tool, it's very comfortable. And by the way, the tools are very good. Like we're in an age as security professionals where the tools have more capabilities than they ever have had, right? And there's a ton of integration with them. So I'm not, and that comment is in no means meant to slam the tools that we're using. But there has to be connection between them.
Jason,
I was going to say,
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
I think some of the controls are really starting to show their age, right? I was just looking at some of the FedRAMP controls because we're headed down that path, and one of them, you know, is yeah. I'll take PayPal donations to help me survive. But the idea of one of the controls is you have to escort, you know, and supervise any third party visiting your data center. It's like, well, I don't visit AWS. I'm not going to go and escort someone as they swap out a hard drive. That is such an antiquated approach in thinking about a control. So I was wondering if you'd heard of the MVSP .dev that Google, Okta, Slack, and Salesforce put together. 24 fresh controls. You don't get to be a customer of Google unless you can pass all 24. So it's an enterprise level thing. It's not for mom and pops, but it seems like an interesting idea is to get away from some of these older controls, because it's good to have continuous validation, but you know, I don't encrypt my offsite tape backups, right? I don't use tapes. You know? I mean, the assumptions in some of these controls questions are horrible.
Yeah, no, they definitely are. And for that, I mean, how I've seen that addressed, Mike, is, you know, you get a forward-looking assessor who can say, okay, well, because you're running on a serverless architecture in the cloud, that's why you don't have to worry about like man traps in your data centers type of thing.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's up to us too to be forward-thinking, right? I don't think we want to. I think we would all agree that we're not trying to use these frameworks. I mean, obviously they're there, and once they're there, it's good to follow them. But I think if we can be proactive and forward-thinking ourselves, just as security professionals, that will go a long way. So we're not relying on someone else. We can think out of the box, and I think forums like this help to really push those types of ideas around.
By the way, Paul Lancy, I don't know if you knew this, but FED in the FedRAMP stands for Fun Every Day. Who would have known?
Sure.
Thank you for clearing that up for us, Paul. Thank you very much, Mike Wilkes. I have a few more questions to go here, and thank you for both Jason and Dan as well, and to the crowd. Lots of good bad ideas and good ideas coming in. I used to give everyone crap that they had far more bad ideas than good ideas, but which is always the case, by the way, because we have more fun with the bad ideas. Let me also remind you that to register for next week's video chat, Hacking Prioritization, next Friday, March 25th, and we'll be putting the poll up in 6 minutes for the best bad idea. So if you have a good bad idea in your holster, make sure you get it out now. All right. This is a good question. What are the most, and I'm just looking over here, what are the most valuable technologies or most important technologies in your stack that you need to validate? I will start with you, Jason.
So I would say probably controls technologies that involve identity management. The reason I say that is because the compromised identity is always what the attackers are going to go after, whether that's actual identities, machine identities, anything, because the access control and access to data is extremely important. Now, once you after that, I would say probably the tools that are monitoring because we want to and hopefully have an understanding of day-to-day operations and known goods. So if we see deviations from that, we can say, wait a minute, this is anomalous and that looks odd, that looks weird. But again, how do you validate that, right? And there's certainly ways to do it, but that's where I would start.
All right. And what about you? What have you found, Dan, that are the top security tools you need to validate or technologies you need to validate? I'm sorry, security tools may be doing the validation. Anyway, technologies in general is what I mean.
So to answer it at a very non-specific level, I would say it's going to be wherever your customer data is located at. So anything that you're using to secure that and run that, and wherever that's stored, like it has, you have to validate that those technologies that create that defense in depth for you are working properly as they should.
Let's get to the surprises, though. Hold it. So, what are you surprised? Like, had we not validated this, holy crap, what would have happened? Like, what? I mean, sure, Jason, you've seen that's like the validation process reveals probably a lot. What is often revealed?
Things that you either take for granted or that you assume that things are there, and we all know what happens when you assume. But I've been working with clients when all of a sudden realized AV's not on these machines, or we spent a lot of money on these certain types of controls, and we expect them to be working, yet we're seeing contrary, right? When you start running either penetration tests, offensive exercises, it's contrary to the fact. And a lot of times it's just, again, due to small policy or misconfigurations, and a quick little change can actually have a very high return on investment. But it's just assumptions that you think things are good, and when you start to test, it's not.
Dan, can you reveal anything, and it could be not current job, past job, but something that you validated, like, holy crap, was this actually going on?
Yes, I could.
You're not going to say anything? Come on.
No. So I am going to actually mention something that I think a lot of people overlook, which is how things are designed. Mm-hmm. So as an example, way back in the day, we had a server room, and just the construction of it was so poor that it was like a fire hazard, and it actually caught on fire. And the fact that it wasn't even that wasn't even considered in the design of it, it was something I completely assumed. Well, you're going to stick a rack of servers in there, so of course you're going to have it to be temperature controlled. Why wouldn't it be? And of course it wasn't. And so, I think that's one thing. I think another thing is, we had a situation one time, and I'll keep this very generic because those of you who know me may be able to guess this. Not my current role or my current company. Mm-hmm. But we had an SSO with a client, a major client, and we did not configure the ping federate properly. And so when they began to basically kind of sniff their SSO traffic, it broke it, and actually resulted in like people next to each other who are SSOing seeing the other person's data. And, not validating that the SSO was set up properly. And again, it was something that was set up like 4 years prior that had worked just fine for 4 years. And then, in literally, a minute, you have 700 people hitting that SSO, within a half hour, and each one seeing the next person's data. Right. And so it's just like, those are the things that I would say always keep me up at night, especially as you come to a new company. You're just wondering, like, what skeletons are in the closet that the team is really blind to, because they've been validating everything else, and you're catching those things. But where are your validation blind spots? And that's something that I think every CISO worries about.
All right. So tagging on to that, what do you feel, Jason, I'll start with you on this one. What do you feel desperately needs validation that most people are avoiding doing? Or don't even think, not avoiding, or just don't even think to deal with?
That is a really good question. Things, I guess, would, to Dan's point, be some of the skeletons in the closet. Maybe,
or maybe the great assumptions, because like you made the great assumptions, like, yeah, of course you temperature control these servers, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would think controls probably for legacy type systems, because they've been there for so long. And a lot of those controls, we think, yeah, all right, because they've been there for so long, or we're using these technologies, then whatever we've put in place, they've worked for the longest time, we're good. And they have to be there, right? Because they're still critical to the business at some point. We see this with even legacy applications. You don't want to assume, but a lot of times you're just like, I think, we put this in place, we're good. But without checking, it's like that could be a big gap.
All right, let's bring on Craig Herter because we're ready to play our game I Object, of which everybody understands the rules of the game, but we will be playing that in a second. But we'll get him on. Actually, let's bring him on right now if you can. Oh, there he goes. Let's listen.
Who will be holding the mic at the end of I Object? Here are the rules. The game lasts 1 minute, but the clock stops when a competitor says, I object. Time doesn't resume until the judge says sustained or overruled. At any moment, any competitor can object. Don't be polite, you want to win. So find a reason to object. The one who's speaking on the microphone at the end of the minute will be the winner.
All right, we all understand the rules. This is how it works. All right, Jason will be starting our argument is our topic for today, which is best way to handle security validation. Jason will begin at any point. You, Dan, or you, Craig, can object. And I should also introduce Craig Herter, who is our winner of last week's Best Bad Idea, which is, by the way, is determined the following week as well, because so many bad ideas come in. And by the way, the bad idea poll is up. So go ahead and vote in the poll. Register for next week's video chat. We keep saying that. Next week's Super Cyber Friday. We have a new name of the show. All right. Is everybody ready? Andrew, hopefully you're ready on the clock. He's going to handle the clock. Jason, you begin. Dan and Craig, you can interrupt at any time, and then it just keeps rotating. Jason, begin.
Our ultimate goal with security validation should be to get to a point where we are continuously validating.
I object.
Hold, wait. What's your objection?
I think first we got to know our environment. Our first step is
sustained. Go ahead.
If we don't know where we're at, we don't know what we're securing, right?
I object.
Hold on, what's your objection?
You should already have a good feeling of what is already there. Yes, you want to do
sustained.
that.
I object.
Hold on, what's your objection, Dan?
They're both wrong. You should start with what your customers want.
I object. I object. They're not good.
Wait a second. Okay, what's your objection?
That's clearly not where we want to focus. Yes, your customers want things, but our customers
sustained. Go ahead.
Our customers don't know our businesses, right? Our businesses know our businesses. Yes. And yes, we're looking to obviously provide service and goods.
What's your objection?
You're focusing on the fact that you have customers. I work.
Oh yeah, you might not have customers yet. You could be starting out sustained. Go ahead.
You may have people that need to and are dependent on services that you provide that are not customers.
What's your objection?
Customers are not. Your business is your business. So you're going to have assets. You're going to have things you're going to need to validate.
Sustained. Go ahead.
To protect those assets. So it could be customers, could be anything else. What's critical to your business? Start validating those controls. We talked about those controls, processes, and procedures.
I object.
Okay, what's your objection?
Because your security validation, you can scope yourself out of an effective security validation by choosing not to include the components that you need to include.
Sustained. Good.
So you need to make sure that as you move forward and you're doing security validations, back to my original point, you've got to know your environment. You've got to know what you need to be providing to in my instance, your state entity, your citizens within the state that you need to be providing all of these services to, whether it's
oh my God, Craig wins. Awesome job, Craig. Awesome job. Excellent job, all three of you. Excellent job. Kudos. Craig Herter, the winner, and the Best Bad Idea winner, which, by the way, I would say we have a high percentage of Best Bad Idea winners come on and win I Object. So kudos. And by the way, the chat room blew up. Excellent job, all three of you. Thank you very much, Craig. All right. We are 7 minutes away from our brand new game. You'll be excited to see our brand new game. We'll be playing that in a few minutes. But by the way, not that many questions have come in. And I believe actually you asked this question, Mike, comment in your when you came on camera, the one that's in here. But don't get rid of it. Let's just double check that you did ask this very question when you came on camera earlier. Let me go to some of my questions, though. Here we go. We talked about like what are you avoiding, what people are not paying attention to. Let's just talk about prioritization, which will be our video chat for next week. Make sure you register for that. Prioritizing. Start with you, Dan. What do you prioritize in validating first? Like you talked about, like what is your customer's data? Are you prioritizing like we're getting backups? I mean, is that where you start?
Well, I think the first so I think it obviously depends where where you're starting. So first, before I even answer that question, I would say you have to come into your environment and assess to understand kind of what you're working with and where you're at. Mm-hmm. I think once you've done that, then, it's really a matter of looking at it from just a pure risk perspective. So where's our biggest risk? where's our biggest exposure, whether that's, true cyber risk, or if it's like maybe some regulatory risk or something like that. And then I think you have to, the key component that I think a lot of security leaders miss is you have to then validate that what you're prioritizing aligns with what the business is, thinks that should be prioritized. Now, I know that can get
how
a bit
difficult is that?
It's very difficult because, let's say you work for a company that builds houses, and every money they're going to spend patching their server is less money than they're going to take to build a house.
Mhm.
Right. So at some point you start to get into that negotiation. That's why it's super important to basically articulate what that risk is. And that's where I think security leaders and the CISOs have to be, almost like, marketers, business people, so they understand like ROI and IOI and things like that. But I think that's where you go. When you first step into a situation, typically because there's some security that's built up, or if it's a brand new environment or company, there's a lot of opportunity where you'll get a lot of support from the business. But after that, once you've been operating for a while, that's where you really need to build those relationships so you can articulate that risk well.
How do you deal with prioritization, Jason?
Yeah, I think, Dan, going off of what you just mentioned, right? Because you originally, before you said customer data, and I guess this is a question to you, and then I'll continue. So the customer data in your world, right, is that critical information, or what's critical to the business? Is that the case? Is where you prioritize that, or?
Well, so in the healthcare space, it's all about PHI, right? So
Right.
As I think everyone knows, HIPAA is pretty, strong in terms of what the consequences are for not securing the data in the way that the government's outlined. So that's why, and so you'll see in like the highly regulated spaces, wherever the regulations drive, is typically where everything else goes, because it's usually, regulation first, and then what the customers care about second. Because I'll tell you, if a customer loses their medical record, they're actually not as upset about that as if they lose their credit card. But the government and the regulators actually take an opposite view. That's much worse than losing a credit card.
Yeah.
So I think it depends on the nuance of the space that you're in.
Agreed. And to that point, right, I always take a step back and say, well, it depends. I've worked with, organizations, either manufacturing or whichever, if they lose the availability of their data, even just to produce, or they're part of a supply chain, that's critical to them. So they need to make sure that information, or the systems that allow them to continue to produce, is set. And of course, then I'd want to start there. So I think it does. I think we need to depend, what's critical to what's critical to our business, what's critical to our customers and our services that we're providing, and then work our way backwards from there.
Yep.
Good points all the way around. We are just 2 minutes away from our new game. Let me throw in I don't know if there's a question or more a comment, but I'll throw these out. Deputy Patel asks, or makes a comment, the real solution is to have an instant response plan quickly. Let the lessons learned be known to third parties so that they can use prevention. This goes to sort of the inside outside the mic sense. How much is your validation roping in your third parties, Dan?
I think it depends. So third party. So first of all, validation is happening before incident response, most of the time. I hope. if it's not, you won't be a CISO very long. But
by the way, that was one of the bad ideas I think I saw early on.
Oh yeah, okay.
Deal with it after incident response.
Again, I think it depends on what your customers want and what your regulators expect, and so it's going to really vary from. But I will say, like, politically, internally, for a security leader, it's almost like you have a family member that tells you something, and then, like, let's say your spouse or your son or daughter or your parent tells you something, and then you have a friend that tells you the same thing, and you're like, hey, my friend told me this, and then they want to like smack you in the face because, like, I've been saying that all along. In the same way, it's good to have that third party attestation. You can go to your CEO and say, hey, they said we need to do this because we're not hitting this control. So in that regard, that's where I find those third party services and attestations to be the most effective.
Sometimes they don't listen to you, listen to somebody else. Is that true, Jason?
Well, I was going to ask, when you meant third parties, because when you said third parties, I was thinking they're parties that we do business with.
Yeah, that's what I was mostly thinking. But a third party could be a consultant too, I guess.
100%. I mean, that's
it could be both. Yeah, and I think.
But I was thinking more of the third party vendors. Yeah.
Right.
It depends on the audience.
I think, Dan, everything you said is absolutely correct. To take it from the other angle, when I think of third parties, I want to understand, well, first off, how are they getting access to our environment or the information, right? What process and procedures do we have there? And then can we run or get an understanding of, what if someone with this level or this profile, this identity, right? Going back to that conversation, they were to be compromised, would it spell certain doom for us, right?
All right, we have a new game.
It's time to play a brand new game.
All right, everybody in the chat room can play along as well. This is kind of a fun, quick little game we have. It's just it's a game where what we did is we searched some terms on the interwebs, and you have to determine which of these terms get the most average monthly searches. So which is the most popular term, if you will. So, whoops, here we go. Here's first round, and I'm going to want both of you to answer. And again, in the chat room, you can answer as well. Here we go. First one, most average monthly search queries for USB drive, flash drive, USB stick, thumb drive, or jump drive. Jason, Dan, what do you think? Which one do you think it is?
USB drive's got to be first.
D.
First, I'm sorry, you say B, flash drive?
No, thumb drive.
So you say D, thumb drive.
Yeah.
I say
Jason, A, the War of the Roses. Ooh, D, somebody's coming in. The correct answer, everybody, is, whoops, where's my mouse? Correct answer is, actually, you know what? Do you want to try for second and third, too, before I go further? Second and third. A lot of coming in. A's and D's. It's a lot between.
I would say USB drive is first. So A is number 1, C is number 2, B is number 3. And maybe I'm biased. I live on the West Coast now.
Okay.
Maybe that's what we say
think?
here.
Dan, what are the 3?
I said D was first. I'll say I'll differ from Jason. I'll say D, C, A. I don't know.
Jason got it correct, though. It is USB drive for 49,500. Number 2 being USB stick and thumb drive D. So there were a lot of A's answers, but a lot of people thought it was D as well. All right. Good answer. All right, here we go. Next one. Most average monthly searches for the term security controls or security settings. Which you think is more popular?
B.
Definitely B.
Not even close.
Yeah, definitely B.
B?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see what we got.
People want,
Yes, correct answer is B. 700, almost double there.
Yeah, because people are trying to they're Googling how to get around them. So how do I get around these security settings?
All right, good answer. Here we go. And the last question is, most average for cloud security or security breach, which gets more?
B.
B.
B?
For sure.
Yeah.
For B for sure?
Yeah,
Let's
for
see.
sure.
You are correct. 3,600. Not a lot more, but yes, definitely more. B as well. All right. Excellent job. That was our new game. Hope everyone enjoyed our new game. We'll have to come up with some more sound effects for it and an actual intro. Let us know if you like the new game because we'll play it a lot more. It was actually it was fun. Anyways, we got a lot of comments here. Thank you everybody for playing along. We could throw it up as a poll, but I think it's more fun to just watch everyone comment so you can see who got it right and who got it wrong, for that matter. Cloud security breach is also going to be even.
Oh, I'm sure
worse.
it's going to be.
Anyways, everyone likes the game, it looks like. All right. And by the way, if you have not voted in the poll, please go ahead and vote in the poll right now, because we are going to invite the 2 people who have the best bad ideas on in about a little less than 10 minutes, maybe 8 minutes or so. And I will announce who are the 2 worst ones, but I want more people to vote. So get in there and vote if you have not voted. Unfortunately, you can't vote more than once, which I would like that feature to vote more than once, just like Chicago voting. All right. Here's a good question from David. I don't know what David's last name is. It's not me. And I don't know if this happens, so I'm going to start with you, Dan. What do you do with the systems that the business is too afraid of downtime to validate? And do you need downtime to validate, too? I'll throw that out.
For me first? It depends. No, I mean, it depends on the nature of the system. But what I would say is, like you'll see this in healthcare, when it comes to open enrollment for Medicare in October through December, right? That's a huge time for those companies to enroll retirees. And even like an hour of downtime is like millions of dollars of revenue that's lost. And the way that I've seen that addressed is, it's a negotiation with the business of saying like, look, if we don't do the validation, this system may not be available. And if it's that critical, we need to validate that it can be available to make sure that it's running smoothly before we hit prime time. So what I like to see happen is like have a negotiation. What we're going to have outages. They're either going to be planned outages or unplanned, or maybe both. But for us to have the least amount of unplanned outages, we need to have some planned ones, right? And so it's working with the business, working with the stakeholders to understand that there's no system out there that's going to be up 100% all the time. We live in a world where the systems are just too complex. No system in the history of the universe has had that kind of uptime ever. And so it's really about kind of articulating.
By the way, that's an interesting point. Nothing has that uptime ever, period. Yeah. So like when they say, no, but that's a good point. An hour down is a million lost, which, you look at financial systems, it would be more than that.
Totally.
But there's got to be, something has to be figured out. Jason, how do you deal with this? And have you had this complaint from customers as well?
So I think all of Dan's points, again, extremely valid. Usually when I'm talking to clients, I get an understanding of, well, when are you doing things, or when are you taking or doing system maintenance? Typically it's on the weekend or after hours, right? So that's a good place to start. But there are certainly ways to do things safely. And it does depend on us knowing our own system. So for example, are things going to go down with a ping sweep, right? That's not so good. So maybe we need to be with those systems a little bit more careful. Also, what I've seen a lot of customers and clients do, not with just systems, with their own technologies that they use, is that they'll fail over to other systems while they test and or validate and or upgrade and then fail back over. There's many different ways of architecting, but I think first and foremost, we have to understand, again, what the inventory is, how sensitive are these systems, and then again, what are we working with? And to Dan's point, can we make the argument and say, look, if we have to have a little bit of downtime, so let's make something work and let's plan for it so we don't have an instance where all of a sudden it's like poof, and now we're scrambling.
All right. Let's take a look at the poll and see which are the most voted up ones, because I want to pick a winner right now. And I'm just going to go, let's see, that one's got 6 and this one's, okay, I think we have 2 winners right now. And please pipe up if these are your bad ideas. Number 1, only validate security controls after you have been hit by ransomware. Well, that's good, but you're still validating security controls. So there is something good there. It's actually happening at one point, maybe after the fact, after when you want it. But who did that one? Want to know that one. And then Lemil says, security and usability are often at odds. So if your user community is angry and frustrated at the security team, your controls must be valid. So the first one is Jay. So Jay, awesome. Jay, make sure your microphone and camera are working. And actually, Andrew, make sure you drop that link so that people can actually test it. So who was the second one there? And the second one is Dwayne Gran. Dwayne, okay, so make sure both equipment and drop that link to make sure they can test it. And we'll get you on in about 5 minutes to play, to face off. And Jason and Dan will be the judges. Also, if you've not registered for next week, go ahead and do so now. Let's get back to some of our questions. And more have come in. Let's see. Stephanie Cass asks a very good question. And I'm going to throw this one to you, Jason. What is the best way to implement continuous monitoring for security validation? And I'm sure this can be answered in many different ways dealing with what you're dealing with, but give me your best answer on that one.
Continuous monitoring with security validation?
Yeah, or continuous, you could call it continuous security validation, I guess.
Sure. What we'd want to get to a point is where that becomes part of our every other process, right? So what I advise customers on doing is, again, what's your change management? Because that is a lot of times you're introducing those variables into the environment. So what you can do is tie those efforts and make that the last checkbox to validate. And you can use, again, if you have a team, that's great. A lot of times that's a challenge for organizations. They don't have the expertise. What we offer is automation around that to make it a little bit easier. And then when you're continuously doing it, it's almost like, you have a pulse on the situation. And if your heart rate's rising, you can figure out why. And of course, you're going to want to tie this into other things like SIM and all those other controls to see, are things working as they expected or as we expect them to be?
So to a degree, it seems like it's a culture thing as well. Yes.
100%. I mean, that's if you can start ingraining that into and have the support from the top down to say, look, we're gonna be in a better place by doing this, then great. All more power to you.
Dan, have you had better sort of validation experiences at companies than others, I would assume?
Yep.
And can you tell me what changes when you have a better validation experience versus one where you do not have as good of one?
So validation is a sign of maturity. And so when you are validating things, you are less surprised by when incidents happen. And you actually have a lower incident rate. And actually, it lowers the burnout rate of your people. Because if you're not validating anything, especially with the technologies that we use to operate our security programs and the technologies we use to operate our business, your security team is going to be on fire all the time. And you're not going to be able to hire enough people because it's not going to be the business.
So there's a major trickle-down effect here if you don't
Absolutely.
do it.
Absolutely. Yep. You
And
start building up security debt. It's just, it's bad.
And does management realize this?
I think sometimes they do. I think again, that's sort of the role of the security leader is to demonstrate that and to show them that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well.
Yep.
And they understand the concept of burnout, and they don't want burnout. So.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're still in the middle. We're still in the middle of the Great Resignation. So I know that there's people on this call that are having a really hard time hiring and filling and backfilling roles, and so I think it's more.
And by the way, a lot of people who want to jump ship,
time.
I would assume, who are in the chat room right now.
Right.
So, Jay Howard is the Jay that because we found out we had two Jays on board. So Jay Howard and Dwayne, you're going to join us in about 3 minutes or so. We'll have you on in about 3 minutes. All right, let me get to the questions again. Questions have come in. Actually, I'm going to ask one that's on my list right here. Let me go to my questions. This should have been a question I asked at the very beginning, and I'm going to start with you, Jason, on this. I'm going to sort of give my answer as I'm asking the question. What is the biggest struggle for security validation? I'm going to say the answer is just doing it. Is there more to it than that?
Yeah, I mean, just doing it and thinking that it's an impossible task, right? It's like, where do we even begin? But I think a big challenge is understanding what controls, and again, that special specifically that inventory. So you're going to validate, but like we were saying and we were arguing before, you need to first have an understanding of what's there. And I think that can be challenging for folks, as well as the fact that it requires sometimes you to take away from other initiatives in the organization. So you need to make it a priority. And how do you do that? What do you shift around? Or is that going to require more people or more expertise that you may not necessarily have?
What about you? What are you finding is the biggest hurdle, Dan?
Two things. One is doing something with the results, right? It's easy to say, I ran a test.
That is a classic problem. See, you hear this from pen testers. I sent this report in last year.
So that's the first one. And the second one is baking it into your overall running of your business. So it's frequent. Because if you're not doing it frequently, if you're not having this continuous mindset, then you're, I don't want to say you're almost better off not doing it, but like the value is just not there. If you're going to do validation on your firewall like once a year and then just not touch it, that's just foolish. So it's the doing something with the results now that you have it, and it's making sure that it's baked in and repeatable.
And I would say have a plan even before you are testing. Like when this comes out, this is what we're going to do, and even have
that.
That
and understand the associated costs with that, because that's the other thing too. We're going to run this pen test. This pen test is going to cost us $50,000. Okay, great. Oh, I forgot to tell you, it's going to be like $150,000 in FTE resources and hours to go remediate what we find. So now it's $200,000. That's actually 400% more than what we were anticipating and what we told the business.
Jason, Dan gave a good answer to this with regards to, one of the trickle-down effects of security validation is, just improves, burnout and just people's exhaustion. Are there other initiatives within an organization that can be that can be leveraged with security validation?
Other initiatives. Well, for example, do you have certain, you're talking about like if you have projects and things like that you want to
Well, it could be
move forward?
Well, yeah. I mean, the example that Dan gave was, employee retention. That is an initiative right there. So it could be like, are there other things that result when this happens? And then you just talk about just in general organization culture improves as well. Is there more that we can sort of point out? So essentially, to make an argument to do this more, I guess is really what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Because by the way, nobody wants to hear we need to validate this for the sake of validation. You know what I mean? They want to go, why the friggin' hell are we doing this?
Yeah, I think it's really to just say, listen, are we ready? And that question of are we ready can answer is to many things. Like, are we ready for attacks? Are we ready for outages? Are we ready for whichever? And the only way you do that is by actually just getting up and doing it. At first, I was originally going to answer and say that I think the biggest thing for me too, when we're talking specifically about security controls, is minimizing the dwell time, right? So of attackers inside the environment. And if we know that we can respond within a certain period of time, and that is continually getting better, then we know that we're ready, and that, and then we can even time metrics and say, hey, good job, right? Or you didn't click this, or you didn't do this, or you've responded in enough time. Awesome, right? And give kudos for the hard work that all the security practitioners or anyone in the organization is actually doing. You can actually reward them or just give them kudos.
Let's bring Dwayne and Grant on. I'm sorry, Dwayne, Grant, and also Jay on. There's Dwayne, and hopefully we'll get Jay on as well very soon. The crowd is going nuts. They're thrilled, but pretty good. They're actually cheering for Jay to come in right now. So Jay, get on. Here he is. Here's Jay. Awesome. Jay,
Hi.
Nice to meet you. First time here.
Yes, first time. It's been a great experience so far.
Awesome. Well, here's how this works. I want you and Dwayne to repeat what your bad ideas are, and then the goal here is to argue. Your job is to argue to Dwayne why your bad idea is worse than Jay's bad idea, and Dwayne, your job is to argue why yours is worse than Jay's, and then my two guests up here will be the judges to determine who is truly got the best bad idea. Dwayne, since you are the seasoned professional here, because you've been to many of the CISO series, Super Cyber Fridays, I will ask you to begin. Repeat what your bad idea was and why you think it's better than Jay's.
Okay, so my idea is that because usability and security are often at odds, then if your user community is frustrated and angry at the security team, then that means your controls must be valid.
Right, which that seems reasonable to me, actually. Now, why is your bad idea worse than Jay's, which I remember was the one to validate after ransomware?
Well,
what do you think?
You see, I think if we focus on the idea of completeness here, is that a ransomware incident could happen because of a dozen different sort of entry points and so on. So while I like what Jay says, his is going to expose, one of a myriad of things. Whereas I think when people are angry, you hear anger all over about things. They hate the phishing tests. They hate the MFA application. I mean, it just comes at you so, all over the place. And what's so bad about it is that people are angry about a whole bunch of other stuff going on in the business too. So you can just kind of end up being overwhelmed and tune it all out so that you won't get anything done.
Okay, that's a good argument. All right, Jay, what's your argument? Why is yours worse than Dwayne's here?
Yeah. So mine was only validate security controls that have been hit by ransomware. Basically, the reason behind that is we aren't validating any security controls until after we have an incident. We need to have...
Which is, by the way, a classic.
Yes. It happens more. I've seen it happen more and more. And to be honest, we had... I've been going through all of my security controls as well because we had different companies here locally that actually have been hit by ransomware recently. So I'm trying to take that bad action and move ours into a better, more secure controls currently. So the biggest thing here is, though, you don't move. You need to be moving before the incident.
That's a good point.
Too much of that.
All right.
Around.
Let me throw this to my judges. Which one do you think is truly the worst bad idea? Dan, I'll start with you.
They're both terrible. So congratulations, gentlemen. I think people get angry over everything these days, so I got to go with Jay. I think the ransomware thing is worse because an angry
normal for Dwayne.
An angry user is not going to end up in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times. Ransomware may. So,
but I also want to point out that with Jay's example, validation does eventually happen. So actually, the 100%. Job actually gets done at one point, not at the wrong time, but it does happen.
True, yeah.
Jason, what do you think is the worst one?
I think I got to go with Jay as well, just because to that point, I've seen. I mean, I've even when I've worked with clients, they get angry at me, and I'm like, this isn't personal, right? I think that it's unavoidable. But what is avoidable are things that, like incidents, right? If you're proactive about it, and I think not doing and waiting, even though yes, you're correct, David, that you will be validating after the fact, but it can be so damaging that it almost could be to the point of no return at that point. And that's why I'm choosing. That's why I'm going with Jay.
All right, Jay, rookie comes in, wins. Congratulations, right there. Good job. Thank you very much, Dwayne. I like yours as well. I'll also say I really like Mike Wilks's. I don't know if he got any votes on that, but that was one of my favorites as well. I like that as well. Also, please vote for the 10% poll that just went up. We have if you scroll below, actually, let me just mention this. This one already got a bunch of votes. This is, again, 10% better poll. Start with your critical and essential systems and applications, and then work in concentric circles for the rest of the enterprise based on risk. So I would assume this also connects to data, what you had said earlier on. Whoever said that, speak up. Who said that one? I like that tip as well. We have only 8 minutes left. I'm going to say this now. Go ahead and click that button up at the bottom of the screen, because that's going to change in about 3 minutes to our meetup link, which I want everyone to join us for our meetup afterwards as well. So click on that now to register for next week as well. Thank you. By the way, I got to say kudos to the chat room. You guys have been blowing it up today, which has been phenomenal. I greatly appreciate that. Let's go to one more question here, and I'm going to throw this to you, Jason Form. You know what? This is something you mentioned earlier, and I want you to give me some more explanation of this, of what you can specifically do and show. And dwell time was one of the things that you said, which I think is good, but give me some more depth. You said another form of validation is being able to tell and prove to management that you're ready for an attack at any given moment. And I think that's really what we want to ultimately prove from validation. So dwell time is great, which, by the way, we've heard multiple times. If you're going to measure one metric, that's the one, dwell time. What are other things that we can kind of show and to demonstrate, like, hey, like, we've done this, you can feel better, our risk is lowering because of this kind of thing? Like, what can you say?
Yeah. So what I've seen when I work with a lot of my clients and customers is they're looking to actually test the SLAs of the incident response team. So whether that's the incident response team internally, or a lot of times it's the incident response team that they have, they have third parties for. So they will say, well, no, let's not say anything. Let's run these offensive exercises. Let's see, one, are things going to fire? And then if things going to, if they fire, great. Who are they going to escalate to? What is that procedure? Can we follow it from soup to nuts, from the quote unquote initial intrusion when things begin, all the way to when it gets escalated or noted to the proper person? And then you can even go a step further if you're really running these types of drills, create the ticket, create the incident, and then close it and say, okay, well, now take a step back, look at the metrics and say, here's where we are. And then you can use that as a baseline as you continue to see if we can continually improve, like 10% better, here. And say, yeah, well, the business says, well, what about these segments of the environment, whether it's tied to compliance or critical assets? Say, yeah, well, we actually did this a month ago. Here's what the results were. Can we make it any better? yeah, we've identified some gaps. Here are the gaps, and here's what we're focused on to improve them. So it's almost like saying, all right, maybe we're not at 100%, we're not where we want to be, but we have a plan of attack, and we're continuously improving. And even baby steps are still steps in the right direction of trying to be secure.
We're all for improvement. Dan, what have you done in this respect? And a quick answer, so I'm gonna need to wrap up in a second.
Yeah, I think it's there's a saying that I have, which is measure what you need to know and report on what you want to change. And so, as you look at your specific situation in your specific organization, maybe it's the speed at which you're responding to alerts, or the frequency at which you're testing your controls. So, I would say, those are two other great ones to look at.
All right. All right, I am going to get to the wrapping up the show. I'm going to have the two of you close the show up, but I'm just going to get like a minute response from both of you on this. Next week, or a minute wrap up on our topic today. So next week is March 25th. Click it this very second, because it's going to change in a second. Hacking prioritization and our critical thinking about which security holes need to be filled and which ones don't. If you haven't registered yet, do it now, because what happens? By next Tuesday, if you register, you're automatically entered to win a CISO Series jacket with the brand new logo. That'd be cool. All right, Andrew, change that. I want to change that link below. But Pantera, by the way, is our sponsor for today's event. Thank you to Jason and his company for sponsoring this very video chat. I believe you're Pantera.com. Is that correct, Jason?
Pantera.io.
.io. Excuse my ignorance there. Pantera.io. Hey, starting in 90 minutes from now, Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review. Guess what? I'm going to be hosting this week. Rich Straffolino, who is unavailable, so I'll be your host for today's Week in Review show. We've got Eric Hussey, the CISO over at Aptiv. He will be joining us to provide some context and some very unusual and entertaining stories if you have not been listening to the headlines for this week. So you want to stay tuned for that. Just 20 minutes. We wrap up the week's news and give you some context on it. That's on our CISO Series LinkedIn page. You'll see that there as well. Stick around for a meetup. If you click the link at the bottom, you could do that right now. Do that right now. I want a ton of you in the meetup as well. That's a lot of fun. We get a chance to meet face-to-face and converse. What happened the week? If anyone's looking for something, needs help, that's a good time to do that as well. Hey, tell your friends to join us. We do this every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. And we'll be doing it next week as well. And if you want to sponsor Super Cyber Friday, well, we got openings starting in July. Just email me at david@cisoseries.com. All right, we have just a minute each. Jason, I ask you to give your last comments on this, and also any plug for Pantera you would like whatsoever, and also how they can find more information about it or more as well. So go ahead.
Sure. I think to your point, right, we talked a little earlier, what's stopping it? It's really just getting started. And I think really what our goal here is to make sure that everyone incorporates security validation into their security program, because it really is essential. And to Dan's point, it is a sign of maturity. But just because you might sit there and say, oh, we're not there yet, it's extremely important to make sure that you're ready, and we can absolutely help you with that. We'd love to talk to you about automating some of those tasks, making it a little bit easier. So check out our website, our YouTube, hit me on LinkedIn. It's all good. We're ready to talk.
Sounds good. All right, Dan, your thoughts.
I would say, let's say I'll speak to the people out there that maybe aren't doing a great job of this, and they might feel like a little overwhelmed. I would say just start small. So take a look at, what's most important to you and start validating that. Also, have the business jump in on partnering with you as well, because, this is a quality issue at the end of the day, and higher quality means happier customers, means better outcomes for everybody. And so that would be my advice.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank both my guests today, Jason Martang over at Pantera and Dan Walsh over at Village MD. I'm going to make a wild stab. You're both hiring, yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Check out our website.
Yep, or, same. Are you both going to be available for the meetup? Yes?
Absolutely.
Right now?
Part of it.
Okay. Get in there now. Dan will be there for a few minutes. And everybody else, click that link at the bottom of the screen. I want to thank both of you. I want to thank Pantera. I want to thank the crowd. Thank you. You've been awesome. Click the link below. Join us in our meetup. We're on another platform to do that.